Welcome to this course on effective learning for professional development, and by now we have understood several things: how we think, how we acquire knowledge, how we process it, and how we retrieve it through cognitive sciences. We understood what is called sensation, perception, attention, memory, learning, thinking, problem solving, intelligence, and decision outcome. Important here is to understand that through our cognitive system we must be able to come out with some solutions of a problem which is embedded within the community. Therefore, we at times make solutions without having any expert knowledge system, which we have just understood what is called social innovation, which is a bottom up form of innovation. But this talk is about a top down kind of innovation which we do through a technology based knowledge system, an expert based system, an analytical process which is a continuous and an iterative process that we call as design thinking. Now, thinking, we have talked about innovative thinking and intuitive thinking. We will refer about that once again, but before we go into further detail, it is important for us to understand what is design thinking and what are the concepts that we are going to cover in this talk. First, we will understand the three concepts that is relevant to understanding this topic, which is design thinking. Now, design thinking is more like a mindset where our thought process is geared towards solving a problem. And that solution does not come just out of fluke. It takes a lot of time, not just by a person, maybe at times with a team, to find out a solution for a problem which is embedded within the society. And how do we do it? It is more, as I said, a mindset, more an ideology. And this ideology has been put forward by many people, but one such person is called, his name is Tim Brown, the photograph that you see. But relevant to this is also our understanding of innovation and intuition, because they are also very relevant in design thinking. We have understood what innovation is all about and what intuition is all about, but it is very relevant for us to understand, in order to examine what design thinking is all about, the contribution of innovation and the contribution of intuition. So, we will first try to understand what do we mean by design thinking. So, design thinking is a process. The process is actually geared in order to solve a complex problem, and the problem is generally not theoretical in nature. In innovation framework, we said that the innovation is possible a theoretical innovation or a translational innovation, that is through basic research and through translational research. Design thinking is more about a translational research through which we try to find out a solution through a user centric manner, that is a solution oriented research. It focuses on achieving practical results and solutions. Now, many a time we come out with a solution through our research which is not technically feasible, that is, they are theoretically possible, but unless they are technically feasible, that they can be developed into a product or a process. For example, I can technically develop a product or a process which is something cannot be converted into reality. That is, I can come out with a tabletop prototype of a particular product, but it may not be translated into a production. So, that is not which we are talking about in design thinking. In design thinking, it must be technically feasible, economically viable, but somebody who is interested in procuring that product must be able to make use of it or can afford to use them. and it is desirable by the user. That is, it is a human centric issue and there is a real human need. I may actually develop something for which there is no human need. That is also an innovation. We can make some innovations in the space, but at the moment, if that is not the real human need, we will not call it as part of the design thinking. So, design thinking is something which is a complex problem that we try to solve in a user centric manner that are technically feasible, economically viable and desirable by the user. Let us see then once again we will try to revisit the concept of innovation and intuition, because without which we will not understand how design thinking works. So, as I said in our earlier module on innovation and intuition, when innovation and intuition are combined, that is our analytical thinking and our intuitive thinking combined, the design thinking comes into fore. We have come to know that intuition finds its expression via blinking, which is instinctual, and innovation comes through thinking or through logic, which is reason based ideas. And we also have understood that intuition is discontinuous, non analytical, while innovation is continuous and analytical. Actually, they are not opposite, they are not comparable, they are not compatible, they are complementary in nature. That is, the strength of intuition is not there in innovation, and the strength of innovation is not there in intuition. So, strength of intuition and weakness of innovation, and strength of innovation and weakness in intuition, when they come together, they come out with a product, they come out with a process which we call as design thinking, which is a framework. And in the photograph you see how design thinking works. It is actually a 50-50 mix, analytical thinking and intuitive thinking. Therefore, we need to understand what are the characteristics of design thinking, because based on this framework we need to understand what are those characteristics. In this characteristics of design thinking, that there must be a superior solution. There may be many solutions available for something, but it must be a very superior solution. Let me give you an example, like cashless payment, the kind of UPI kind of payments, which has come out with a solution. Earlier also we had a solution. If we purchase things, we used to pay cash. Today we have a solution which is a cashless solution. With our mobile phone itself, we can actually, or with our credit card itself, without carrying money, we can actually solve this problem. So, this solution, which is just not a solution, is a very superior solution, and it is a low risk because you are not carrying cash, and it is a high cost effective. Billions of transactions are being made throughout the country and without having money in your pocket. But it requires a lot of team engagement. The design thinking is not possible by one individual, because you need complementarity of thoughts also. The complementarity, compatibility of thoughts also are required, and at times there are non-linear thoughts. That is why the intuition comes here, because generally innovation is a very linear process, linear thoughts, but intuition comes through a non-linear thought process, and everybody is immersed into the problem, and through that immersion they come out with a solution. So, let us try to understand some of the examples that we have in hand. As I said that these are superior solution. OTP verification services, one time password verification services, has become very, very useful. Earlier we used to get lot of false calls, lot of false claim, and I mean, if your mobile phone has been stolen, somebody could have made use of it and your money could have been lost. Today we have got a OTP verification solutions and services, which is a superior solution. We have food delivery apps like Uber Eats or Swiggy or Zomato. All these apps have come out with a superior solution. That is, you want delivery of the food back home, and you can even trace which route the delivery man is actually following and how much time will it take. It is a very superior solution. Streaming movies to customers' home, Netflix for example. Earlier we used to see movies in the halls itself, and it may not have been to my choice the kind of movie they are actually showing in the theater. But today you can do it by paying a small subscription to Netflix, and it can actually stream in your own screen back home. So that's also a very superior solution to your problem. Apartment sharing platforms, Airbnb, you do not have to bank on hotels everywhere. A lot of people actually, through this platform, you can go anywhere and you can share somebody else's apartment and stay there. So these are some of the very excellent examples. GE, for example, General Electric, has come up with a healthcare system which is also a very superior solution. The photograph that you see is a kid-friendly MRI scanner. The MRI scanner is something where even adult people are scared to enter in, because they force you to develop some kind of claustrophobia, a fear of closed places. And for kids, it is even more difficult. They find it very difficult to enter into that and get their required body parts scanned. So GE has come up with something very interesting. The children are actually supposed to enter into that and find some solutions of a typical problem which is kid friendly, and the machine is designed also in such a manner the kid finds it very easy to enter without having any panic. So I think these are some of the examples. There are numerous such examples which are available in the market, and some of these examples can actually give you the idea what design thinking is all about. Now let us see how design thinking comes into picture. What are the stages, and the stages that actually give us the idea how one has to develop this design thinking. Now there are 5 stages into it. The stages that we are going to discuss, that is empathize, define, ideate, prototype and test. We will talk about these 5 stages. Let us start with one particular step, that is the first step, empathize. Now empathy is very crucial. Empathy is not sympathy, we all know. You have to put yourself on somebody else's shoes. If somebody is facing problem, if people are finding difficulty, you have to sense that difficulty first before you try to solve a problem. So by having empathy, the designers actually set aside their own assumptions. They do not go by their own mindset. I told you in the beginning that design thinking is a mindset. Through this mindset, you actually develop a empathy for others and gain insight to the user's need, their problems, their demands, and how they can be helped out. So empathy is the first step. Unless you have got the empathy, you cannot actually innovate such things. I may have empathy for my own PhD thesis, but that's not design thinking. Design thinking is something where you first understand that people are suffering and people need some kind of benefit. So that empathy will be the first step in design thinking. Then you have to define it, because as I said, empathy doesn't come from one person, it comes through a team. So everybody, if there are 5 people in the team, they all accumulate information. They try to analyze the observation and synthesize them. What is the real problem? Because at times we fail to reach out to the real problem. We may have come out with different symptoms of a real problem, and symptoms are not the core problem. So when 5 people actually try to see a problem from 5 different angles, we understand what is the core problem. So the second stage in design thinking is defining the core problem. And after defining the core problem, you have to ideate it. Idea is the most important thing, because in the following slide we will talk about ideation little more deliberately, little more elaborately. And this idea is nothing but thinking outside the box. It's just not a traditional thinking. That's why in design thinking you require both innovation and intuition, I told you. Because through innovation you come through a continuous process, a logical process, a reasoned manner, but through intuition you can think differently. Instead of thinking different things, you think different things. So that thinking out of the box actually allows you to do some kind of brainstorming amongst the people within the group, and they find an alternative way to view problem. So the same problem, if there are 5 people in the team, they try to find solution in 5 different ways, and that's called ideation. And through that ideation, we'll actually talk about divergent thinking and convergent thinking. In cognitive science, we have discussed about divergent thinking and convergent thinking. We will try to reiterate that thinking pattern once again to explain ideate again. So ideation is something which we are going to discuss in the following slide. When we talk about ideation, it's a process characterized by the alteration of divergent and convergent thinking. I told you already. Now divergent thinking is something in which a diverse group of people involved in the process through a structured brainstorming. I mean, they all try to think differently, and thinking differently means through a brainstorming process. They don't try to find a solution in divergent thinking. They try to understand how through different ways, perspectives, approaches a problem can be solved. And when such kind of divergent thinking comes, next comes the convergent thinking. If I try to find a solution of a problem, and if I get 5 different ways that can be solved, I try to understand the superior solution. The superior solution, if it is identified by the team, it becomes a convergent thinking, because it aims to focus on the different proposals to select the best choice. So through this process, the team goes through some kind of pattern finding, and through that pattern finding, we understand that, well, there is a solution available which can be converted into some kind of prototype, and that prototype can be a superior solution. So in prototype development, we start creating a solution. The aim is to identify the best possible solution for each problem. Therefore, the team produces inexpensive, scaled down and prototype version of the product, and the prototype is just not the final product. It may be a tabletop prototype. As I discussed already with you in social innovation, is also inexpensive, and is a process through which we come out with some kind of a small prototype or a model, which is not a translated version of a product, but which can be tested, retested before a final product is produced. And in the final stage, you try out the solutions. The team tests those prototypes with real users to evaluate if they can actually solve the problem. If they fail to solve the problem, the people will go back once again to the same process, and they will try to understand how best it can actually solve the problem. So these stages, if these 5 stages actually define design thinking, we will try to understand how, therefore, design thinking is different from a traditional kind of thinking, because design thinking is something where you brainstorm, where you try to go out of the box, where you are not utilizing your own personal assumptions, you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, their difficulties, you empathize, and then only you come out with a solution. So they are different from traditional kind of thinking. So let us see how traditional thinking is different from design thinking. When we talk about traditional thinking, traditional thinker always try to find a right answer, but design thinking people always think about the right kind of question, because it is the question which is more important for design thinker rather than the answer, because answer is not fixed. If the question is found to be right, then answer can be given in different ways, and from that they can find out the right way. Now in traditional thinking, we try to find out a solution which is certain, which is validated, which will not change, and which does not create any kind of ambiguity in the mind of the user. But in design thinking, people actually embrace ambiguity. Uncertainty management and ambiguity tolerance is something which is a characteristic feature of design thinking. They embrace ambiguity and they manage uncertainty before a solution is reached. So, in traditional thinking, people always try to avoid a failure when they create a prototype. But in design thinking, people know that there is every possibility of failure. In fact, they are more interested in learning through failure, and they are very much aware of it. Therefore, design thinker has got a different kind of mindset as compared to the traditional thinker. Now, traditional thinker has got a passive experience about innovation, because these innovations are already in the book, already written. They just replicate it in order to experience some form of innovation, which we call as a passive innovation, because they themselves have not engaged into it. But when you come to design thinking, it is an active experience. An active experience is some experience where you personally you have got a experiential learning, hands-on learning. In cognitive science, we talked about hands-on learning. We talked about learning through trial and error, learning through conditioning, learning through insight, social learning and experiential learning. Actually, design thinking is an active experience or experiential learning. So, in traditional thinking, people are generally outcome expert. They would like to find out a product somehow. But in design thinking, people are process expert. They are actually trying to understand what is the process behind, because as long as you do not understand the process, you cannot replicate it. And traditional thinking is more through theoretical process, a verbal process, but design thinking more in an imaginative process, a visual process, a pattern searching process. So, you see there is a fundamental difference between traditional thinking and design thinking. Therefore, it is important for us to understand in nutshell what is that we understood about design thinking. So, design thinker actually understand the problem first. Instead of trying to find out a solution, they try to understand the problem first. They involve the users, that is, whosoever is actually facing the problem, they are party to this thinking process. The members of the people who are actually facing the problem, they become party to that team. So, in design thinker, people involve the user. They think big and go wild. They do not try to focus on a convergent thinking process where they can find one solution. Instead, they try to first go through a divergent thinking process where so many approaches, so many perspectives they try to find out, and then they come out with a prototype which they test it and then they implement it. After implementation, if they find that it is not to the satisfaction of the user, they go back to the same process of empathize to once again coming back to the test level. So, end user integration is a very important part in design thinking where implementation actually takes place. So, the quote that you see, that coming up with an idea is very easy. Lot of people have got ideas, but coming up with the right one, so having the right idea and getting the idea right are two different right things. So, coming up with the right one takes work. With design thinking, throwing out what you think you know and starting from the scratch opens up all kinds of possibilities. You may have a good idea, but when after incubating a good idea, when you actually translate it, when you try to implement it, consolidate it, you will find that there are so many other ways this can be done, just not one particular way. So, people use design thinking as an opportunity whenever they face a particular problem. So, design thinking is something which is just not about design per se, which is actually a problem solving framework. Here the problem matters much more. The solution may come much later. The problem is much more important, and this can be applied to various fields beyond design, from business strategy to education to healthcare. So, whenever we try to innovate something, learn something, if we have a design thinking matter in idea in our learning process, it actually gives us a different perspective. and it is just not a brainstorming. Brainstorming is something, it may lead to something where we feel that there must be a solution must be coming, but this is just beyond, just not a brainstorming process. It ranges from understanding the user needs to prototype to testing, so many things. Ultimately it may not lead to any kind of innovation, it may not, because while it can foster innovative solution, it does not guarantee innovation. As I said, that design thinking is something where problem is a much bigger focus rather than the solution per se, and it may not come out with a solution, so people will go back to their drawing table once again, will try to do it. So design thinking in learning is something which we must be able to understand, that if we have to start a design thinking in learning, we have to understand the problem. For example, we may have a idea of a startup, and through that startup idea we have to understand the problem, what is that we would like to solve. It's just not a idea to do business, it's about idea to solve a problem which is solution oriented. And then it is important for us to immerse ourselves into the problem, because we have to live with the problem, we have to breathe with the problem. And one such problem is that the photograph that you see, some of the children research scholars in IIT Delhi, they have come out with a solution, because we have got wheelchairs which require some kind of accessibility in our design, but many of our buildings are not accessible to actually handicapped people for their wheelchairs. This girl has come up with a solution where it can actually use the wheelchair through the stairs. So I think unless you enter into the problem, what kind of physical or structural difficulty the disabled people face, you would not be able to come up with such kind of solution. So one has to go wild. They should not hold anything back in the brainstorming. They should not make judgmental at all or about a possible solution. Instead, they will come out with more and more solutions which are possible. Instead of having a convergent thinking, they must bank on divergent thinking first. After that, they can converge their ideas, try to find out what would be the best solution, and from there they can create a tabletop prototype. From there they can come out with a production ready prototype, and from there they can actually test it and then see whether it can actually come up with the kind of solution they are intending to. So they implement ultimately and continue to think beyond it, that can there be a better solution than what we have just come out with. So therefore design thinking in learning is something where nothing stops at any point of time. You actually start with your empathy, you come out with some kind of solution, but you don't stop there, you continuously think about it. So in business environment also people continuously think about it, and the bottom photograph that you see, I already talked about, that's about a water wheel. That's a design thinking, how that design can be made more superior, or even a water wheel, even that can be motorized, so that 50 to 100 liters of water women can easily bring without using their personal strength. So with all that, we have come to know what design thinking is all about, what innovation is all about, where intuition comes about, and how these two things, the two sides of our brain, the two sides of our thinking process, can be combined, system 1 and system 2, in order to come out with a final product. So you can actually look into several kinds, several books and YouTubes, and lot of TED talks are also available on design thinking. You can consult them, but HBR's the design thinking book is something which I would personally recommend. Thank you so much.